The salvage yard floated in dead space like a graveyard of dreams, and Lisa Monroe walked through the wreckage with her scanner in one hand and hope dying in her chest, because she had been searching for 3 months and found nothing worth saving. He was 32 years old, and everything she loved had burned when the Kalthari Empire decided her home colony was in their way. And she watched from an escape pod as the orbital bombardment turned her world into glass. Now she lived on a borrowed ship with a crew of 5 other survivors, and they scraped together credits by selling salvage to stations that did not ask questions about where it came from. Her scanner beeped, and she stopped walking because the reading made no sense at all, and, according to her equipment, there was a heat signature coming from inside a cargo container that had been floating in vacuum for at least 10 years. Lisa pulled her plasma cutter from her belt and carefully burned through the seal, and when the door swung open, she saw something that made her forget how to breathe. A woman lay curled on the floor, and her skin was pale like moonlight, and her hair was silver and floated around her face, even though there was no air movement, and her ears were pointed, like something from ancient Earth legends. 2 small creatures were pressed against her body, and they had scales that shimmered between red and blue, and tiny wings folded against their backs, and even though Lisa had never seen a dragon before, she knew exactly what they were. The woman's eyes opened, and they were the color of spring leaves, and she looked at Lisa with an expression of desperate hope mixed with bone-deep exhaustion. "Please," the woman whispered in a voice that sounded like music, and bells and wind through trees, and her hand reached out toward Lisa with fingers that trembled from weakness. Lisa made a decision in that moment that would change everything, and she activated her emergency beacon and called her crew, and within 20 minutes they had the woman and her 2 dragons on their ship. The woman's name was Arya Windwhisper, and she spoke a language that should not exist, but somehow Lisa understood every word. And Arya explained that she came from a place called the Twilight Realm, where elves and dragons lived in harmony for thousands of years. But something was killing her world, and the magic that sustained her people was fading, and the dragons were dying, and Arya was sent through a dimensional rift to find help because the ancient prophecies spoke of humans who could do impossible things. Lisa wanted to laugh because humans were barely holding on in this galaxy, and the Kalthari Empire was crushing colony after colony, and nobody had the strength to fight back, and what could one salvage crew do against the darkness swallowing everything? But then Arya took her hand, and Lisa felt something flow through her like electricity made of starlight, and suddenly she could see things differently, and the broken ship parts around her were not just scrap anymore, but pieces of a puzzle waiting to be solved. The 2 dragons were babies, and they made sounds like purring mixed with crackling fire, and one was warm to the touch while the other was cool, and they looked at Lisa with eyes that held intelligence far beyond any animal. Arya explained that dragons bonded with warriors in her world, and these 2 had no one left because their parents died defending the last portal, and they were alone and scared and looking for someone strong enough to protect them. Lisa had not felt strong since she watched her world burn, and she carried guilt like stones in her chest because she survived when millions did not. And what right did she have to keep living when so many others were gone? But the dragons did not care about her guilt, and they climbed onto her shoulders and wrapped their tails around her arms, and she felt their trust like a weight and a gift, and something inside her that had been frozen since the bombardment started to thaw. Her crew thought she had lost her mind when she announced they were going to build a warship from salvage, and Arya was going to teach them elf magic, and they were going to train dragons and somehow stop the Kalthari Empire. Her engineer, whose name was Holly Park, said it was impossible because they had no weapons, no armor, no proper engines, and barely enough credits to buy food for a month. Her pilot, whose name was Danny Cruz, said they would die before they got close to an Imperial ship because the Kalthari had technology, centuries ahead of human designs. Her doctor, whose name was Rita Stone, said Arya was dying because she was too far from her home dimension, and the dragons would not survive without their natural magic. But Lisa looked at each of them and asked a simple question, and her voice was quiet but carried steel underneath. And she said, "Do you want to keep running, or do you want to make them pay?" The silence that followed was heavy with memory and pain because every person on that ship had lost someone to the Empire, and they all carried scars that would never fully heal. Holly was the first to speak, and she said, "If we are doing this, we do it right, and I will need Every piece of salvage in this yard in 3 months minimum to make something that flies. Danny nodded and said, I can plot jump routes through dead zones where Imperial patrols never go, and buy us time to build. Rita looked at Arya and said, I will do everything I can to keep you alive long enough to teach us what we need to know. The last 2 crew members were twins named Casey and Morgan Lee, and they handled weapons and security, and they looked at each other with that silent communication. Twins have, and then turned to Lisa and said, we are with you until the end. Arya smiled for the first time since Lisa found her, and tears ran down her face, and she said, humans are everything the prophecies promised, and you do not give up, even when hope seems impossible. The dragons chirped and their wings fluttered, and Lisa felt their excitement through the bond forming between them. And she realized the warm one was male and the cool one was female, and she named them Ember and Frost that night. Lisa sat in the cargo bay surrounded by scrap metal and broken dreams, and Arya sat beside her with the dragons curled between them, and the elf began teaching her the first words of magic. The words felt strange in her mouth, like speaking underwater. But when she said them correctly, a piece of scrap metal lifted into the air and hung suspended and glowing with soft light. Arya explained that elf magic was about seeing the connections between things and understanding that everything in the universe was part of a greater pattern, and humans had the ability to learn this faster than any species she had ever met. Over the following weeks, the ship became a workshop, and Holly worked 18-hour days welding and wiring and cursing, and slowly the salvage began taking shape into something that almost looked intentional. Danny practiced flying with the new systems Arya helped them install, and the ship could now jump through dimensions for short bursts, which meant they could appear and disappear in ways that would confuse any enemy. Rita discovered that dragon scales had healing properties, and when ground into powder and mixed with water, they could cure almost any injury, and Arya's health began improving as she taught more magic to the crew. Casey and Morgan trained with weapons that combined human technology with elf enchantments, and their plasma rifles could now shoot rounds that phased through shields. And Lisa trained with Ember and Frost, and learned to see through their eyes and feel what they felt, and the bond grew stronger every day until she could call them from anywhere and they would come. 3 months passed like a fever dream, and the ship that had been a collection of random salvage now looked like something between a warship and a work of art, and Holly stood back with grease covering her face and pride in her eyes. The hull was made from 17 different vessels, and each piece was chosen because it fit the pattern Arya could see. And when the elf touched the metal and whispered her language, the seams fused together stronger than any weld. Danny had installed engines from a racing yacht and combined them with Kalthari power cores they stole from a supply depot, and added the dimensional jump drive that Arya designed, and the result was a ship that could move in ways that broke physics. Rita converted the medical bay into something that could handle both human and elf biology, and she grew dragon-scale moss on the walls that cleaned the air and healed minor injuries just by breathing near it. Casey and Morgan had turned the cargo bay into an armory and weapons, covered every surface, and some were human-made and some were elf-enchanted, and all of them were designed to hurt the Empire. But the real surprise was what Ember and Frost had become, and the baby dragons were now the size of horses, and their intelligence grew every day, and they could understand complex battle tactics and execute them perfectly. Lisa stood on the bridge and looked at her crew and realized they were not just survivors anymore, and they had become something new and something dangerous, and the fear she used to feel had transformed into cold determination. Arya appeared beside her, and the elf looked healthier now, and her silver hair glowed with inner light, and she said, "The ship is ready, and your crew is ready, and the dragons are ready, and now we must decide where to strike first." The question hung in the air like smoke because choosing a target meant committing to war, and once they started, there would be no going back, and the Empire would hunt them until they were dead or victorious. Holly pulled up a star map and highlighted 17 Imperial positions and said, "These are supply depots and troop stations and communication hubs, and if we hit them, we hurt their expansion plans." Danny shook his head and said, "Those targets are too small, and we need something that sends a message and makes the Empire realize humans are not going to roll over anymore." Rita suggested they rescue prisoners from the labor camps because the Empire kept thousands of humans working in mines and factories, and freeing them would give them allies and resources. Casey and Morgan wanted to hit an Imperial shipyard because destroying their construction capability would slow their advance for years. But Lisa had a different idea, and she pointed to a system on the edge of Imperial space where a massive fleet was gathering, and intelligence reports said they were preparing to invade the last free human colonies if we hit them there. Lisa said quietly, and her voice carried the weight of her decision, and we stopped that fleet. Then we save millions of lives and prove that humans can fight back. The crew looked at her like she had suggested flying into a star because the fleet she was talking about had over 100 ships, and thousands of trained soldiers and the best weapons the Empire could build. Arya studied the map, and her green eyes calculated possibilities, and she said the numbers favor them greatly, and even with our advantages, we would be outnumbered 50-1. Ember and Frost had grown large enough to project their thoughts, and Lisa felt their confidence through the bond, and they were not afraid, and they were eager to test their power against real enemies. Holly did the math and said if everything works perfectly and nothing goes wrong and we get incredibly lucky, we might destroy 10 ships before they blow us apart. Danny added that jumping into the middle of a fleet would trap them because the dimensional drives needed time to recharge, and they would be surrounded with no escape. Rita pointed out that even if they survived the battle, the Empire would send everything they had to hunt them down, and their lives would be measured in days, not years. Lisa listened to all the reasons why her plan was suicide, and she understood every argument and knew they were right, and then she said, "We are doing it anyway, because this is what we built this ship for." The silence that followed was different from before, and it was not doubt or fear but acceptance, and her crew had followed her this far and they would follow her into hell. If that was where she led, Holly sighed and said, "Then we better make sure the shields can take a beating, because we are going to need every advantage we can get." Danny started plotting the jump coordinates and calculating the exact moment they would need to appear to cause maximum confusion. Rita began preparing medical supplies and setting up emergency protocols because people were definitely going to get hurt. Casey and Morgan checked every weapon system 3 times and loaded ammunition and primed the enchanted rounds that Arya had blessed. Arya gathered her magical focus and began preparing spells that would enhance the ship's abilities and protect the crew and amplify the dragon's power. And Lisa sat with Ember and Frost and strengthened their bond, because in the coming battle they would need to act as one mind in 3 bodies. The night before they launched, Arya found Lisa sitting alone in the observation deck and staring at the stars, and the elf sat beside her without saying anything for a long time. Lisa finally spoke, and her voice was raw, and she said, "I am sending my crew to die because I want revenge, and that makes me no better than the Empire." Arya shook her head and said, "You are giving your crew a chance to matter, and they could run forever and die slowly, or they can fight and die with purpose, and you offered them the choice and they chose to stand with you, but what if I am wrong?" Lisa whispered. "And what if we fail and it accomplishes nothing? Then we fail," Arya said simply, and her voice was gentle but firm, but doing nothing guarantees failure. And at least this way we fight, and the Empire will remember that humans do not surrender quietly." Lisa felt tears on her face, and she did not try to hide them, and she said, "I am so tired of losing people I care about." Arya took her hand and said, "That is the cost of loving anything in this universe, and loss is the price we pay for connection. And your crew knows this, and they follow you anyway because you give them hope." The dragons climbed into Lisa's lap even though they were far too big, and their weight was comforting and warm, and she felt their absolute trust through the bond. Morning came too fast, and the crew gathered on the bridge, and everyone was quiet because they knew what was coming, and words felt inadequate to express what they were feeling. Holly ran final checks on all systems and gave a thumbs up. Danny input the jump coordinates, and his hand hovered over the activation button. Rita stood ready at the medical station with supplies organized and emergency procedures memorized. Casey and Morgan manned the weapon controls, and their faces were calm but their eyes burned with purpose. Arya stood at the center of the bridge and began chanting in her ancient language, and power gathered around her like visible light ember, and Frost moved to the launch bay where they would exit the moment they arrived at the battle. Lisa sat in the captain's chair and looked at each member of her crew and said, "Thank you for believing in something impossible. And no matter what happens today, you are the bravest people I have ever known." Holly grinned and said, Let us go make the Empire regret ever hearing about humans." Danny laughed and said, "Initiating jump in 3 and 2 and 1. The ship folded through dimensions and reality twisted inside out, and for a heartbeat, they existed everywhere and nowhere. Then they emerged into normal space, and alarms screamed, and the view screen filled with Imperial warships that stretched to the horizon. Admiral Vexer sat on his command throne and watched the pathetic vessel appear on his sensors, and he started laughing because this was what opposed the might of the Kalthari Empire. His officers joined in the laughter, and across the fleet communication channels lit up with mockery and jokes about the scrap ship that dared challenge them. But Lisa Monroe was not laughing, and neither was her crew, and Arya's magic blazed like a star, and the dragons roared with voices that echoed through the void. The battle was about to begin, and the galaxy was about to learn that humans did not need perfect ships or overwhelming numbers, and they just needed a reason to fight and people willing to stand together. Admiral Vexer stopped laughing when the scrap ship did something impossible, and it split into 3 separate signatures on his sensors, even though his eyes told him there was only one vessel, and his tactical officer reported weapons charging. At levels that should melt the ship from inside, open fire on that junk pile, the Admiral ordered, and his voice carried contempt and amusement because he commanded the most powerful fleet the Kalthari Empire had assembled, and one human ship was nothing. 20 Imperial cruisers fired their main cannons, and the energy beams crossed the void at light speed, and they should have vaporized the human vessel in the first second, but Arya raised her hands and spoke words that predated stars, and a barrier of crystallized magic appeared around the ship, and the Imperial weapons hit the shield and scattered into harmless light. Holly whooped from engineering and said shields holding at 98%, and these elf tricks are better than any human tech. Danny threw the ship into a spiral that should have torn it apart, but the dimensional engines let them slide between normal physics, and they moved like water flowing through cracks. Lisa felt Ember and Frost launch from the bay, and suddenly she was seeing through 3 sets of eyes and feeling 2 additional bodies, and the sensation was overwhelming and perfect. Ember spread his wings, and he had grown to twice the size he was that morning, and his scales burned with inner fire, and when he opened his mouth, a stream of plasma hot enough to melt starship armor poured out. The nearest Imperial destroyer tried to target him, but he was too fast and too small, and he flew along its hull like a burning knife, and the metal peeled away and exploded, and the ship broke in half. Frost was ice to her brother's fire, and she exhaled a beam of energy that froze atoms in place, and when it hit an Imperial cruiser, the entire vessel turned brittle and shattered into a million crystalline pieces. The laughter on the Imperial channels died and was replaced by confusion and then fear, because their sensors could not track the dragons properly, and the scrap ship was everywhere at once, and their weapons could not touch it. Casey and Morgan fired the main cannons, and the rounds were wrapped in elf magic, and they passed through Imperial shields like they were not there, and exploded inside the enemy ships. Holly rerouted power from life support to weapons, because they only needed to survive for a few hours, and breathing could wait until after the battle. Danny dodged between capital ships and used them as cover, and every time the Imperials tried to get a clear shot, he jumped through dimensions and appeared somewhere else. Rita monitored life signs and fed stimulants to the crew through the air system, because they were all pushing beyond human limits and needed chemical help to keep functioning. Arya stood like a pillar of light, and her magic flowed through the ship and made everything work better than it should, and she was not just one elf anymore, but a channel for her entire race, watching from across dimensions. Lisa coordinated everything, and her mind processed information faster than conscious thought, and she directed the dragons and gave orders to her crew, and watched the tactical display and somehow kept track of 100 variables at once. Admiral Vexer realized he was losing, and the realization hit him like cold water because he had never lost a battle. And the idea that humans in a salvage ship could threaten his fleet was impossible. He ordered his ships to focus fire on the human vessel and forget the dragons, and 50 ships turned their weapons on the scrap ship at the same moment. The barrage that hit their shields was enough to crack a moon, and Arya screamed as the barrier buckled, and Holly reported shield failure in 5 seconds. But Lisa did not panic, and she reached through the bond and called Ember, and Frost and the dragons responded instantly. Ember dove between the Imperial ships, and his wings generated a heat shimmer that disrupted targeting systems, and missiles that were locked on the scrap ship suddenly lost their targets Frost flew above the battle and exhaled, a cloud of supercooled particles that created an artificial nebula, and sensors could not penetrate it. And the Imperial fleet was suddenly firing. Blind Lisa jumped the ship through dimensions and appeared behind the Imperial formation, and Casey and Morgan fired everything they had into the engine clusters of 3 capital ships. The explosions created a chain reaction, and 6 more ships were damaged by debris, and the Imperial formation broke apart into chaos. Danny laughed like a maniac and said, "This is the best day of my life," and he threw the ship into a barrel roll that brought them face to face with an Imperial battleship. The battleship fired its main cannon, and the shot was too close to dodge, and Holly screamed that shields were still recharging. But Arya was ready, and she threw her hands forward, and a portal opened directly in front of the ship, and the Imperial beam went through the portal and came out behind the battleship and hit its own engines. The battleship went dead in space and started drifting, and its crew evacuated and escaped. Pod's Admiral Vexer watched his fleet fall apart, and he could not understand what was happening, because every tactical advantage belonged to him, and yet the humans were winning. Through impossible tricks and desperate courage, he tried to call for reinforcements but discovered that something was jamming all long-range communications, and Arya smiled because she had locked down the channels the moment they arrived. He tried to order a retreat, but Lisa had positioned her ship to block the main escape vector, and the dragons were herding Imperial ships like wolves with sheep. He tried to activate his flagship's self-destruct to take the human ship with him, but Ember melted the control system before it could trigger. Admiral Vexer felt something he had not felt in 20 years, and it was fear, and he realized he was going to die here, unless he surrendered. Lisa opened a channel to the Imperial flagship, and her face appeared on every screen in the fleet, and she looked tired and determined and absolutely certain. "This ends now," she said, and her voice carried no anger or hate and just cold facts, "and you can surrender or you can die, and I do not care which you choose." Admiral Vexer looked at the human woman and saw someone who had lost everything and built something from nothing and turned it into a weapon that could challenge empires behind her. He saw the elf woman glowing with ancient power and the 2 dragons circling his fleet like death itself, and he saw her crew working with perfect coordination born from trust. He made a choice that would save his life, but end his career, and he broadcast the surrender signal, and across the fleet, weapons powered down and ships went dark. The battle had lasted 18 minutes, and the most powerful Imperial fleet ever assembled had been broken by 7 humans and 1 elf and 2 dragons, in a ship made from scrap. Lisa slumped in her chair, and the adrenaline that had been keeping her going suddenly drained away, and she felt every injury and strain and exhaustion. Holly reported critical damage to 17 systems, and they needed to land somewhere safe for repairs. Danny said the dimensional drives were burned out and would take weeks to rebuild. Rita was treating burns and broken bones because even with dragon scale healing, the crew had taken damage. Casey and Morgan collapsed at their stations and slept where they fell because they had pushed beyond their limits. Arya sat down slowly, and her glow faded, and she looked pale and tired, but satisfied. Ember and Frost returned to the ship and curled up in the cargo bay, and their mental voices in Lisa's head were triumphant and exhausted. On screens across the galaxy, people watched the footage from the battle and saw what 7 humans could do when they refused to give up. The Kalthari Empire's expansion stopped as if hitting a wall, because their admirals suddenly had to consider that humans might fight back. And in the Twilight Realm, where the elves were dying, Arya's people felt hope for the first time in generations, because the humans had proven they were worth saving. Lisa looked at her crew and felt pride and grief and determination, because they had won this battle, but the war was just beginning and the Empire would come for them with everything they had. But that was a problem for tomorrow and today. They had proven that humans did not need superior technology or overwhelming numbers, and they just needed courage and creativity and a refusal to accept defeat. The scrap ship limped away from the battlefield, and behind them floated the wreckage of Imperial dreams, and ahead of them lay a galaxy that would never underestimate humans again. Amy burst onto the bridge just in time to see Starfire explode from the cargo bay in a blaze of light, and the dragon moved through space like he was made for it, with wings that seemed to catch starlight and turn it into pure energy. The crystal pressed against her chest warmed, and suddenly she could hear everything. Hold tight, Lyra. Starfire's voice rumbled in her mind. I am going for the lead ship. I trust you, old friend, Lyra's voice replied. Amy moved to stand beside Captain Brooks, who was watching the view screen with wide eyes. What in the name of everything holy is that? He asked. That is Starfire, Amy said, and he is about to show us why you do not hunt Lyra's people. On the screen, the 3 Vakran hunter ships had spread out in an attack formation, and they were firing energy weapons that lit up the darkness like deadly fireworks, and the main ship's shields were holding, but barely. Starfire dove between 2 of the hunter ships, and his claws raked across the hull of one, and Amy could see the metal tear like paper, and the ship spun out of control, trailing atmosphere. The second hunter ship turned to target Starfire, but the dragon was already moving, and he twisted in a way that should have been impossible, and his tail whipped around and smashed into the ship's engines. 2 down, Lyra said, and Amy could hear the fierce joy in her voice. 1 more to go. But the third hunter ship was different, and it was larger and covered in strange symbols, and when it fired its weapons, they were not the same color as the others, and the blast hit Starfire directly. Amy felt the dragon's pain through the crystal link, and she gasped and grabbed the console to steady herself. Starfire, Lyra cried, are you hurt? The dragon roared, and it was a sound of fury, not pain. I am fine, he growled, but that weapon stings. The third hunter ship fired again, and this time Starfire was ready, and he breathed out a stream of fire that looked like liquid starlight, and the blast met the enemy weapon halfway, and both attacks exploded in a burst of light that made everyone on the bridge shield their eyes. When the light faded, the hunter ship was still there, but its front armor was melted and smoking. Captain Brooks leaned forward. Target that ship, he ordered. Fire everything we have. The weapons officer nodded, and the main ship's plasma cannons opened fire, and the combined assault with Starfire's next attack finally broke through the hunter ship's shields. The enemy vessel tried to retreat, but Starfire was faster, and he crashed into it with the full force of his massive body, and the hunter ship crumpled like a tin can and went dark. We did it, Lyra shouted, and Amy could hear her laughing through the link. Starfire rumbled with satisfaction and began flying back toward the ship. Amy felt relief wash over her, but then the sensors started screaming. Captain Brooks looked at his screen, and his face went pale. There are more ships, he said, 5 of them coming through the gateway. Amy's heart sank because they had barely survived 3 ships, and now there were 5 more. Through the link, she heard Lyra curse in her own language. Starfire cannot fight that many, she said, not after that weapon hit him. Amy looked at the approaching ships on the screen, and her mind raced, trying to think of a solution. Wait, she said. The gateway. Brooks turned to her. What about it, he asked. If we destabilize it? Amy said the energy feedback might disable their ships, or at least buy us time to escape. Brooks shook his head. Destabilizing a gateway could create a shockwave that would destroy us too, he said. Amy watched Starfire limping back toward the cargo bay and saw the scorch marks on his beautiful scales. Then we need to time it perfectly, she said. We wait until Starfire is back, and then we fire everything at the gateway and jump to faster than light. Speedbrook stared at her. That is insane, he said. Probably, Amy admitted. But do you have a better idea? Brooks was quiet for a long moment, and then he turned to the navigation. Officer, plot a jump course, he ordered, and be ready to execute on my command. Then he looked at the weapons officer. Target the gateway, he said, through the crystal link. Amy heard Lyra. What are you planning? Little warrior? She asked. Trust me, Amy thought, back hoping Lyra could hear her. There was a pause, and then Lyra's voice came back warm and certain. Always, she said. Starfire reached the cargo bay and landed heavily, and Amy could feel his exhaustion through the link. Close the bay doors, Amy ordered. The doors sealed shut, and Amy counted to 3. Now, she said. The weapons officer fired every plasma cannon the ship had directly at the gateway, and the ancient structure began to pulse and shake, and then it started to tear apart. The 5 Vakran hunter ships were almost through when the gateway exploded in a wave of pure energy that spread out like a ripple in water. Jump, Brooks shouted. The ship lurched, and reality twisted, and suddenly they were in faster-than-light travel, and the stars stretched into lines outside the view screen. Amy sagged against the console and let out a breath she did not know she was holding. Did we make it? She asked. Brooks checked his sensors. "The gateway is gone," he said, "and the hunter ships are either destroyed or stranded." On the other side, Amy felt tears of relief sting her eyes. They were safe. She needs to get to the cargo bay and ran the whole way. And when she burst through the doors, she saw Lyra kneeling beside Starfire, and the dragon's scales were smoking, and there was a burn mark across his side. Amy dropped to her knees beside them. "Is he okay?" she asked. Lyra looked up, and there were tears on her purple cheeks. "He will heal," she said, "but he is in pain." Amy reached out and placed her hand on Starfire's scales, and through the link she felt his warmth and strength. "You are amazing," she thought to him. The dragon made a weak rumbling sound. "So were you, little warrior," he replied. "Your plan saved us all." Dr. Chen arrived with her medical team, and they began treating. Starfires wound with specialized equipment, and Lyra held Amy's hand the whole time. When the doctor finally stepped back, she smiled. "He will be fine," she said. "He just needs rest." Lyra let out a sob and pulled Amy into a tight embrace. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved us again." Amy hugged her back and felt Lyra's cool skin against her cheek. "We saved each other," she said. Lyra pulled back just enough to look into Amy's eyes. "In my culture," she said, "when two people save each other's lives, it creates a bond deeper than any ceremony, and I think my heart has already decided you are mine." Amy felt her breath catch. "I think my heart decided the same thing," she admitted. Lyra smiled and leaned in slowly, giving Amy time to pull away. But Amy did not pull away. Their lips met, and it was gentle and sweet, and when they finally broke apart, Lyra was glowing softly. "Is that normal?" Amy asked. Lyra laughed. "It means I am happy," she said, "very happy." Starfire rumbled behind them. Finally, the dragon's voice said in both their minds, "I thought you two would never admit it." Amy and Lyra both laughed and sat together beside the dragon. While he rested, Captain Brooks found them an hour later. "We are heading back to Earth Station," he said. "You will all need to give reports." Amy nodded, but did not let go of Lyra's hand. "What about Lyra and Starfire?" she asked. "Will they be allowed to stay?" Brooks smiled, given that they just helped us fight off Vakran hunters. He said, "I think the higher-ups will be very interested in forming an alliance. And that means Lyra will need a human liaison." Amy felt hope bloom in her chest. "Are you suggesting me, sir?" she asked. Brooks nodded. "You brought them here, Carter. He said you are responsible for them, and besides, I think Lyra would follow you anywhere." Lyra squeezed Amy's hand. "He is right," she said. "Where you go, I go." Amy looked at Starfire, who opened one glowing eye. "And I go where Lyra goes," the dragon said. "So it seems we are all bonded now." Amy felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were happy. "Tears? Then I guess we are a family," she said. Lyra leaned her head on Amy's shoulder. "Yes," she said, "we are." 3 weeks had passed since the battle with the Vakran hunters, and Amy had spent most of that time helping Lyra and Starfire adjust to life on Earth Station, and it was both wonderful and complicated in ways she never expected. Lyra had a habit of standing too close to people and making them uncomfortable, and Starfire kept accidentally knocking things over with his tail because he was simply too large for most of the station's corridors, and Amy found herself constantly apologizing and explaining. But there were good moments too, like when Lyra tried human food for the first time and declared chocolate to be the greatest invention in the universe, or when Starfire discovered that he loved watching old Earth movies and would curl up in the cargo bay with his eyes fixed on the screen. Amy had moved into larger quarters to accommodate her unusual family, and she would wake up most mornings to find Lyra curled against her side, with her cool skin pressed against Amy's warmth, and Starfire sleeping near the door like a guardian. The military officials had been skeptical at first, but after hearing about the battle and seeing what Starfire could do, they had agreed to grant Lyra and her dragon asylum, and they had also promoted Amy to full lieutenant commander and made her the official liaison. Today was special because Lyra had asked Amy to attend a bonding ceremony, and Amy still was not entirely sure what that meant, but she had agreed because she trusted Lyra. They met in one of the observation decks that looked out over the stars, and Lyra had decorated the space with crystals that glowed with soft purple light. And Starfire was there too, watching with his wise old eyes. Amy walked in wearing her dress uniform, and stopped when she saw Lyra because the alien woman was wearing a flowing gown that seemed to be made of starlight itself, and her silver hair was adorned with tiny gems that sparkled. "You look beautiful," Amy said. Lyra smiled, and her fangs showed as, "Do you?" she said. Amy moved closer and took Lyra's hands. "So what happens in this ceremony?" she asked. Lyra looked nervous, which was strange because Amy had never seen her nervous before. "In my culture," she said, "a bonding ceremony is when two souls agree to share their lives, and it is more permanent than your human marriage because it links us together on a deeper level." Amy felt her heart skip. "Are you asking me to marry you?" she asked. Lyra nodded. "In my way, yes," she said, "but I need you to understand what it means, and if we bond, you will be able to feel what I feel, and I will be able to feel what you feel, and our life forces will be connected." Amy thought about this carefully. "Will it hurt?" she asked. Lyra shook her head. "No," she said, "but it will change. You will live as long as I do, which means you will have centuries instead of decades." Amy felt dizzy because that was a lot to process. "And you want this?" she asked. "You want to bond with me?" Lyra cupped Amy's face gently. "I have wanted this since the moment you saved us," she said. "You are brave and kind, and you make me feel things I have not felt in all my 300 years. Amy looked into Lyra's glowing eyes and saw nothing but truth there. "Then yes," she said, "I want to bond with you." Lyra let out a breath she seemed to have been holding. "You are certain?" she asked, "because once it is done, it cannot be undone." Amy smiled. "I am certain," she said. Lyra pulled out a small crystal knife that glowed with inner light. "First we share blood," she said. She drew the knife across her own palm and purple blood welled up. Then she held out the knife to Amy, who took it with shaking hands. Amy pressed the blade to her palm and made a quick cut, and her red blood mixed with Lyra's purple blood when they pressed their palms together. Amy felt a surge of energy flow between them, and suddenly she could feel everything Lyra felt, and there was so much love and hope and joy that it brought tears to her eyes. "And now we speak the words," Lyra said. She began chanting in her own language, and Amy did not understand the words, but she understood the meaning, because she could feel it through their connection. When Lyra finished, she looked at Amy expectantly. "In your language," she said, "tell me you accept this bond." Amy took a deep breath. "I accept this bond," she said. "I choose you, Lyra, and I choose this life with you." The crystals around them suddenly blazed with light, and Amy felt something settle into place deep in her chest, like a piece of herself she had not known was missing. Lyra pulled her close and kissed her, and this time it was different because Amy could feel Lyra's emotions as clearly as her own, and she knew without doubt that Lyra loved her completely. When they broke apart, they were both glowing. "Softly, it is done," Lyra whispered. "We are bonded." Starfire made a rumbling sound that was definitely approval. "Welcome to the family, little warrior," he said. "You are truly one of us now." Amy laughed and wiped tears from her eyes. "How do you feel?" Lyra asked Amy. "Thought about it. Different," she said. "But good, and I can feel you in my mind." Lyra nodded. "And I can feel you." She said, "It will take time to adjust, but we will learn together." They spent the rest of the evening in the observation deck, talking about their future and what it would mean to have centuries together. Instead of just decades, Lyra talked about her homeworld and her people, and how she hoped one day to take Amy there. And Amy talked about Earth and all the places she wanted to show Lyra. Starfire listened to everything and occasionally added his own thoughts, and Amy realized that she had not just gained a partner, but an entire family. The next morning, Amy woke up in their quarters with Lyra beside her, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely content. Captain Brooks had given them a mission to explore the Outer Rim and look for other refugees from the Vakran hunters, and Amy was excited because it meant they would be working together. Lyra stirred and opened her eyes. "Good morning, bondmate," she said. Amy smiled. "Good morning," she said. They got dressed and headed to the bridge where Captain Brooks was waiting with their new assignment. "The mission will take you to the Outer Rim," Brooks said, "and we have reports of more refugees in that area, and your job is to find them and offer them protection." Amy nodded. "We will not let you down, sir," she said. Brooks smiled. "I know you will not, Carter," he said, and then he looked at Lyra. "You have proven yourself to be a valuable ally. And we are grateful." Lyra inclined her head. "We are grateful for your kindness," she said. "Not all species would welcome us." Brooks gestured to the view screen where their new ship was docked. "The Aurora is ready for you," he said. "She is fast and well-armed, and she has quarters large enough for Starfire." Amy felt excitement bubble up in her chest because this was really happening and they were getting their own ship. Lyra took her hand and squeezed. "Are you ready?" she asked. Amy looked at her bondmate and then at Starfire, who was waiting in the cargo bay below. "Ready," she said. "Let us go save some lives." They boarded the Aurora, and the ship was beautiful with sleek lines and powerful engines, and Amy ran her hands over the controls with reverence. Lyra settled into the co-pilot seat, and Starfire made himself comfortable in the expanded cargo bay that had been specially modified for him. Amy fired up the engines and felt the ship hum to life beneath her Earth station control. "This is Aurora requesting permission to launch," she said. "Permission granted," came the reply. "Good hunting, Aurora." Amy guided the ship out of the dock, and once they cleared the station, she engaged the faster-than-light drive, and the stars stretched into lines. Lyra reached over and took her hand. "This is just the beginning," she said. "We have centuries ahead of us." Amy smiled and intertwined their fingers. "Then let us make them count," she said. Through the bond she felt Lyra's love and joy, and she sent her own feelings back. And Starfire's voice rumbled in both their minds. "The universe awaits." The dragon said, "Let us show them what we can do." Amy looked out at the endless stars and felt more alive than she ever had. She had started her patrol that day expecting nothing but routine, and instead she had found love and family and adventure beyond anything she could have imagined, and this was only the beginning. The Aurora jumped to faster than light speed, and three souls bonded together, flew into the unknown, ready for whatever came next, because they had each other and that was all they needed. Amy glanced at Lyra, who was reading the star charts with intense focus, and she felt a wave of affection wash over her. "I love you," she thought. Through the bond, Lyra looked up and smiled, that beautiful smile that made Amy's heart race. "And I love you, bondmate," she replied, "always and forever." Starfire rumbled his agreement. Now the dragon said, "Let us find those refugees and show them that they are not alone in this universe." Amy nodded and set course for the outer rim. Their new life together had begun.